Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for this podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased that you've joined us, and the number of listeners has been just growing exponentially. It's been absolutely fantastic, and there's so many people that want to enjoy this fascinating world of serial killers while enjoying award-winning wine. What's better than that? So why serial killers and wine? Well, the answer is simple. I'm the only winemaker in the world that's ever captured a serial killer. And no, I didn't use wine to do it. But this is real true crime and real wine. And each and every episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, joins me. And together we take you on a journey profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from all around the world. Well, we enjoy our favorite wines. I've got my favorite Casaro wine today. It's our cold case. Yes, a true crime and wine cold case. We'll talk about it later, but pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. You know, Brandy, this is a quadruple header weekend for me. I don't think I've ever had this before. I mean, we've had double header weekends where we're doing 2 true crime and wines, or even a triple header with a podcast. But this weekend, I've got 3 live true crime and wine shows in 3 different cities and the podcast. Oh my gosh, this is kind of exhausting. But hey, we're here and we're going to take you on a journey profiling the life and crimes of Anthony and Nathaniel Cook, a pair of serial killer brothers who spent their bonding time kidnapping, raping, and murdering. And I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, this is an extremely rare case with 2 brothers actually committing such heinous crimes together. And, you know, because of the difference in their age, they really never spent time or grew up together in the family. Their time was during this murder spree. What do you make of this?
Well, we talk about how unusual it is to find an accomplice to help you murder people, and then you have your own sibling willing to go along with what you're doing. So very interested to see how this dynamic worked and how these both were able to really commit these crimes together.
Yeah, a very rare, an unusual case, but that's what we bring you on True Crime and Wine.
Okay, John, so we are here talking about Anthony and Nathaniel Cook, 2 serial killer brothers, very unusual. American brothers. This happened in Toledo, Ohio between the year of 1973 and 1981. They are responsible for at least 9 murders in this area. Initially, one of the brothers, Anthony, was acting alone before involving his younger brother, Nathaniel. But you were talking about the age difference. So Anthony was born in 1949. Nathaniel was born in 1980. So you're right. We do have this significant gap of age. Oh,
58. Yep.
Oh, 58. Sorry. Excuse me.
Yeah. And so what happened is
that's still a big gap.
Well, it is. And they really didn't grow up together. I mean, basically, by the time Nathaniel was really recognizing what was going on, 5, 6, 7, 8, his brother was already off working, trying to help support the family. So what's really strange is it wasn't like these 2 brothers were like really close siblings and did everything together. Because of that age gap, they hardly knew each other until they got together and started killing.
Well, I'm interested to find out, John, how that conversation even began. But the victims they were targeting were often young women or couples. Rape and murder, and methods include shooting, beating, and bludgeoning. So they were truck drivers. We've talked about this. The ability to move around. Was this their mobility a part of their crime spree, or were they more local?
Yeah, that's a great point, Brandy. I hadn't thought about that. How do you start that conversation? It's kind of like married murderers, right?
That's right.
When we talked about Charlene Galeos and Gerald, because they met in a poker club, started dating and then got married and started murdering. How do you approach your date and say, by the way, are you interested in rape and murder? I don't know. How do you approach your brother and say, I'm killing, you want to come kill with me? So, really good point. But again, that's why we bring these cases up. These are the unusual cases of serial killers across the country. And like you said in the opening, this is very rare. It's rare that we can get two people to collaborate or cooperate, but let alone two brothers. And when you see two brothers, I mean, you think they've got this shared family, shared background, shared history. Maybe it was so loosely put together when they were young that they
Hmm.
tried to connect, they tried to bond. Certainly the older brother was the leader, more vicious. Matter of fact, by the time Nathaniel got into committing these crimes, Anthony had been in and out of prison multiple times for very aggravated felonies. And so, yeah, but you got to wonder, how does that come up in conversation?
Well, and I also wonder if Nathaniel, this is his, Anthony's his older brother. He's watching him go in and out of prison, right? He's seeing some of these things. So I almost wonder if he already kind of knew what he was doing on some level, or at least he was some sort of, whether if he knew he was murdering or not, I don't know, or for whether it was going to get to that point. But I think he saw that he lived a life of crime.
Well,
And,
certainly. And
yeah,
I think some of his crimes, I think you're right, like armed robbery. I
right.
think he was convicted one or two times for armed robbery before this. And
Yeah.
so, as kind of a extension of the robbery, they then
Yeah.
went into kidnapping, rape, and murder. But he certainly knew that his older brother was a convicted felon and had done some pretty horrible crimes. For whatever reason, he decided to join him.
So the parents divorced in 1959. As we said, Anthony was the older brother, Nathaniel is the younger one. Anthony born in 49, Nathaniel in 58. The children had to work to help support the family. So we talked about what does your childhood look like when it comes to this? What were they going through, dealing with? The children not only had to work in the family, but Anthony had worked on cars and did odd jobs. So we have two kids. Maybe we haven't talked about their education yet or whether they were going to school, but we know that they were working to help to support the family.
Yeah, and especially Anthony, you got to remember with a 9-year age difference, like I
Mhm.
said, by the time Nathaniel was 5, you're looking at 14, and Anthony's out there working on cars and trying to earn money, trying to help his mom. They had a very large family, and the older kids, that's what they
Mhm.
did. They went to work. Now, early on, we do know Anthony attended the North Toledo Boys Only School for academically challenged students.
Mm.
So we learned, or the family learned at a very young age, he was academically challenged. They tried to help him, put him in the school, but even with that, his grades really were pretty poor,
Okay.
even in that special school. When Nathaniel was growing up, Anthony was pretty much out of his life. He was already out there working, at least part time, trying to earn money to help the family. They then relocated over to Southern California for a few years, but after about 3 years, moved the family back and settled in Dayton before finally, stopping in Columbus. And, we know Anthony had troubles academically. We know he had to work to help support the family. We know he stayed behind even when the mom and Nathaniel and some of his sisters went to California. So Anthony was pretty much on his own. Nathaniel kind of being separated from the other siblings and with his mom, moved in 2 different school districts, 3 different school districts, actually. So we can kind of see what happened to him. He became a loner. He didn't have very many friends. By the time he got into high school, he just didn't fit in. And
Mhm.
eventually he dropped out. So we can already start very early on to see, some of those boxes are being checked by both of these Cook
Mhm.
brothers.
Well, and like you mentioned, Anthony's the older one, so his crimes started. His brother's probably witnessing some of this, the sisters, the mother. He was pretty much a juvenile delinquent, drag racing, purse snatching, and groping, and what considered a sexual assault of a neighborhood girl, touching her. I don't know the length of
Yeah,
that, but
that's where you see that distinction. You're
yeah,
exactly right. And we've got kids, they're in bad situations, they
yeah,
need money. You can understand some of those minor offenses, and when I was looking at this, all of a sudden, boom, a sexual offense jumps out.
yep.
So now we see Anthony already as a young teenager getting into a different category of crime.
So and again, it's the neighborhood girl, and I do think of like predecessors and like what are then going to be predictions of going forward. And we said that there is rape and assault that happens with the both of these. But in 1965, his older brother Hayes the third was convicted of rape and sentenced to 7 to 25 years in prison. And around this time, Anthony shot himself in the chest but recovered. What do we know
Yeah,
about that?
yes, you got to remember. So Hayes is the oldest of
Yes.
all of the children. I think there were 11, if I remember right. There were 9 or 11. There were a lot of children in the family. Hayes was the oldest. Anthony was the third oldest. Nathaniel was way down. I think second from the youngest, 9 years later. So this is already a criminal institution, this family. Hayes convicted of rape. There we've got another sexual crime. Sent to prison. Anthony, this was very traumatic for him. We don't know if he was trying to commit suicide. We don't know exactly what happened. He did shoot himself in the chest, but recovered. It could have been a cry for help. It could have been an actual suicide attempt. He looked up to his big brother. Now his big brother's going away for a couple of decades for the crime that he's committing, and Anthony's kind of left on his own.
John, also listen, it's devastating when something like this happens when your brother has committed a crime and maybe you weren't quite living the life of crime just yet, and that is your example. But to shoot yourself in the chest because of something, you're losing your brother. I can only think that was mainly the reason, was because his brother, who maybe he did look up to and had some sort of relationship with, was going to prison, and he wasn't going to. So John, to me, that is a very unusual behavior. I can understand the person going to prison trying to commit suicide if
Right.
they don't want to go to prison, but for the sibling to do that to themselves.
Maybe do you think he was
I
trying
don't
to
know.
escape? You think he was trying to, I don't want to work. I don't want to take over this family. My dad's gone. My mom's divorced. I don't want to be responsible for this. So do you think he was like, I don't want to do this? And then when he survived, he all of a sudden started doing exactly what his older brother did. Well, if I can't get a job, if I can't work, if I don't have a degree, if I didn't, if I had, poor grades in the special school that I was in, I guess the only course in life for me is crime. And he jumps into it with both feet and gets sentenced to 10 to 20 years for robbery.
And also, John, the schizophrenia wasn't diagnosed at that time, right? And again, the mental state could have played a big part into this.
Yeah, it was diagnosed after the first arrest.
Yep, that's
right. So
yeah,
it was diagnosed after he robbed that pedestrian.
right.
But he never was sentenced for that crime because they said, oh, he's got mental issues. They took him, got treatment, and he was released. So he had already committed one robbery, sent to a mental hospital and released. 8 days after he gets out, he commits another robbery, which shows you what? He knows what he's doing.
Right.
He knows the difference between right and wrong. He knows he was just arrested, just incarcerated, went for treatment, and 8 days later. So we're not talking about, I'm sure the medicine barely wore off by then. Most of the
That's right.
time, in my experience with the boarding houses on my beat and folks being released from mental health institutions, they were given at least 21 days medication. And I
Uh,
could tell you, it would be, I could almost mark it on my calendar. When we would have the buses come in from the mental health hospital, the people would go to the boarding houses. They'd have their food and their clothes and their 21 days of med, and I could mark it on my calendar when that 22nd day hit or that 25th day, because the medication wore off and they were right back in that same situation. Here, I don't even know if the medication wore off. I think this was a conscious decision.
I
8
agree.
days later, he robs a 61-year-old woman.
Yeah.
Now he's arrested, and they go, nope, you're not going back to a mental health institution. You knowingly, intentionally did this. You're
Mhm.
going to prison.
So we've already checked a few of the boxes. What else are you picking on a profiling perspective at this point?
Well, certainly the mental health issues comes into it. We don't know anything about TBI or any traumatic brain injury, but certainly the gunshot wound to the chest, I would probably put in one of those traumatic categories. Intelligence, we know he's below average. We know he doesn't have very many social skills. Don't know anything about animal abuse, but we do check the boxes on petty crimes and on criminal history, because it's not just petty crimes like those initial ones that we heard about. He
Right.
immediately stepped up into robbery, and not only did it once, but did it twice in a row. So Anthony is checking most of the boxes that we see there when we look at their background.
Mhm. All right, so let's get into the victims. We're going to talk about Vicky Small first, white female, 22 years old. This was in 1973. So this is just a few months after Anthony is paroled, and he acts alone in this first known murder. It was about 1:40 a.m. and he encounters the 22-year-old. She was a University of Toledo graduate and karate enthusiast. I encourage all my parents out there to get your kids a little bit of self-defense. It never hurts. But her car breaks down near her apartment. So how did this interaction take place?
Yeah, he offered her a ride and said he
Mm,
would drive her to, back to where she lived, but instead he drove her into central Toledo. He raped her, he beat her, and he shot her 6 times in the head and torso with a 25 caliber pistol. So we know that he was armed. We know he had an intention to do it. And it wasn't just kind of an encounter like he drove up on her, in a
mhm,
broken down car. We know he was actually out looking for victims, probably robbery victims. But when he saw this 22-year-old female, he decided, well, I'm going to rape her, I'm going to beat her, and I don't want there to be any witnesses, so I'm going to shoot her with the gun. Obviously, him having the gun alone as a convicted felon is a crime. So now
mhm.
we've stacked all of these crimes: kidnapping, rape, murder, all of that stuff together. He leaves her body behind a golf club storage unit where it's discovered later that day. But unfortunately, the police botch the investigation. They don't impound Small's car, which may have had some evidence since they were in and around the car when it
Yeah.
broke down. And her death remained unsolved for decades. This is 1973.
Mhm.
He didn't confess to it until 2000, when he was approached by prosecutors and said, hey, you know what? We were working on a cold case, and you and I have talked about this a lot. Literally every day, every week, we're adding new murders, new crimes, new victims to our database because we have technology now. And cold case investigators found DNA, linked him to it,
Okay, great.
and finally, in 2000, when he was already in prison for life, he admitted, "Oh yeah, I did that one too." But
Wow.
this is one of those crimes that if it could have been, solved early, stopped early,
Mhm.
if police could have intervened early,
Yeah.
maybe everybody else wouldn't have died. But she did, and the ones that that followed her,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
We always talk about that, right? Like those missed opportunities of not catching them and imprisoning them, or then they do catch them and then let them go, and
Yep.
then they continue to commit these crimes. Okay, so
Well, and you saw, I hope you noted,
yeah.
after the first robbery when he went to prison, he
Mhm.
was let out early,
Yep.
which just aggravates me. 8 days later, he robbed somebody else. Now he's let out again. And within a
Yeah.
couple of months, he's out not just doing robbery, but kidnapping, rape, and murder. This is a serial offender. We talk about serial killers. We have serial offenders out here. He is already a serial robber and probably at this point, a serial rapist, too. And now he's getting into murder.
This is kind of the point, John, I think, where he starts to talk with his brother. Like he's going to start then committing crimes around 74. Anthony robs two people at gunpoint in Toledo. And he actually returned to prison for 5 years because of this crime. But
Yep.
after he's paroled in 79, he ends up getting a job hauling scrap metal and he gets married. We see this too. He marries a young school teacher. But around this time, Nathaniel reaches out to his brother and the two began spending some time together. So now he's getting married. He's getting in touch with his brother. I mean, maybe is he looking for a different life?
Yeah, I know. I think he's a career criminal.
Okay.
I mean, and I think it's proven that. I think if anything, maybe Nathaniel is looking for a family,
Okay. I can
looking
see
for
that.
love,
Yep.
looking for attachment, looking for, their oldest brother is already in prison. Anthony has been in prison a couple of times now because, like you said, they didn't know anything about Vicky Small's murder, but he went out, robbed two other people, violated his probation, got convicted on the additional robbery charges, and didn't get out to 1979. So I think when by this time, Nathaniel is like, hey, I never really knew my brother. I didn't grow up with him. He's in and out of prison. Maybe he wanted to help him out. Maybe he thought, well, he's settling down. He's getting married now. Maybe that's
Mhm.
the time to reach out to him. And up to this point, Nathaniel's only run ins with the police were traffic tickets. He
Mm,
was really a good kid, right? He was a loner. He didn't have a lot of friends, but he wasn't out there doing what his brothers did.
yeah.
By this age, his brothers had already been robbing
Hmm.
at least as well as raping and murdering. So Nathaniel was kind of a good kid. And I don't know, to me, he might have been looking for that missing attachment,
Hmm.
Brandy.
Acceptance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or just, we see this in families,
Yeah.
especially large families or families that, maybe, separated, they're reaching out. Maybe the same dynamic as someone that's been adopted reaching out to the birth parents.
Yes.
I want to know who I am. I want to know what my family is. I want this attachment I never had. So we're
Yeah.
not really sure the reason, but I think it's a very interesting dynamic that you have this hardcore career criminal who's already committed many robberies and at least one kidnapping, rape, and murder at this point. And you have his younger brother who's never done more than get a traffic ticket, and yet they get together. It's almost, to me, heartbreaking.
I do think that there is some level of acceptance in wanting your brother, right? Like if he was a loner, if he was kind of more of a following type and not really a leader, but you have his brother who is, committing these kinds of crimes. And, did he just want some sort of like acceptance and, like you said, connection? And maybe this is what ends up connecting them in a strange way. Um, not your typical usual way, but we just don't know.
Well,
They're
strange and sad.
so
I,
sad.
I really think this is sad for Nathaniel. Anthony, I think, has made his bed by this
That's right.
point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And but for Nathaniel, up to this point, he really, as far as we know, had not done anything bad.
Yeah. All right, so we know that the first known targeted couple that the brothers were actually involved together was in 1980 of Thomas Gordon and Sandra Pogorski. So this marked really Nathaniel's first involvement in any crime with his brother. Thomas was 24 years old and Sandra was 18. They were sitting in Gordon's car in the driveway of Pogorski's home, and they were just sitting there talking. This was in North Toledo. The brothers were armed with guns. They forced their way into the vehicle, took control, and drove the couple to a remote wooded area in western, Toledo County. Gordon attempts to escape, but was chased down and shot multiple times by Nathaniel. Nathaniel kills him at this point, and then
Yep.
Pogorski is raped by Anthony, stabbed dozens of times in the chest, abdomen, and back. The brothers left her for dead. John, she survives her injuries,
Yep.
crawls to the road for help, and later provides the key testimony against the both of them.
Yeah, so we don't know what was the original motive. Obviously, they brought guns. We do know that.
Mhm.
Was the motive robbery? We know that they were looking for couples. This is kind of their MO and starting to really be part of their profile now, is that they sought out couples in parked cars, kind of like Son of Sam. And we don't know if the intention is solely robbery of personal items and maybe stealing the car, or if the intention is, as Anthony has done in the past, rob them, rape them, and kill them. Now, I kind of think that when Gordon ran from the vehicle in an attempt to escape, Nathaniel might have panicked. He did shoot him multiple times. But once he did that, now Nathaniel has committed murder. So, kind of like when you're sitting at that poker table, he just pushed all the chips in the middle.
Yeah.
He's in. He's got nowhere to go. So whether his intention was kidnapping and rape, his intention might have been just robbery, I don't know. Every indication was he was a good kid up to that point. But then Anthony rapes and stabs Sandra multiple times. And they leave her for dead, but she survives. And that's something else we always talk about, giving advice or tips to the young women out there. And you said, hey, take self-defense, learn some skills, but also you got to have a will to survive. You've got to want to live and survive the attack. She did. She willed her way to the road. She survived, and she testified.
Gosh, I'm so shocked they did not shoot her, if I'm being honest and just frank about how he dealt with the other victim before, and just the beating and the shooting someone 6 times, John, in the head, is a little overkill, in my opinion. So I am kind of surprised. And now there's 2 of them, right? I mean, they've stabbed her multiple times. They probably thought she was dead. She probably didn't move and to protect herself, for them to think she was dead. I can only imagine that's what you want them to think, to go away. But man, from the grace of God, she survives and is able to testimony later.
I've got to believe, Brandy, that they thought she was dead.
Yeah.
I've got to believe when you stab somebody dozens of times, we're not talking once or twice. You stab them once or twice, they maybe not. Maybe you then take a gun and make sure you finish off. When you stab somebody, what was reported dozens of times in the chest, abdomen, and back, I don't think there was any expectation of survival. And I think that's why they didn't shoot her. They thought she was dead.
Well, like you said, they are going after couples now. Next couple we have is Cheryl Fan, white female, 18 years old, and Bud Coates, white male, 20 years old. The brothers abducted 18-year-old Cheryl, and her fiance at the time was Bud, around 11 o'clock at night while the couple was walking home from a friend's house in East Toledo after a New Year's party. So Anthony approaches them with a gun. Nathaniel emerges from the shadows. They forced the couple into the car and drove them to an abandoned garage. Both brothers, so now we have both brothers committing the crime of rape against Fan, and Coates was beaten unconscious with a baseball bat or similar object. So now we see this elevating a bit, right?
Yep.
Now Nathaniel is getting involved in the sexual assault like he wasn't before. So they're evolving.
Yeah, and Nathaniel, like I said, he's already pushed all the chips in the table.
Yes.
So he's already, he already went to the top. He committed murder. He knows he committed murder. So robbery, rape, that really doesn't matter at this point. If he goes down, he's going to go down. He's going to go down hard. Fan, Cheryl was shot in the back with a 38 caliber revolver, but she also survived by playing dead after the attackers left. And Coates survived his injuries, which was he was beaten in the head with a baseball bat. So you've got to think that these guys thought, we've killed him. We've done everything we can. We shot him. We beat him with a baseball bat. And they never expected them to live.
Wow.
Fan spent 3 weeks in the hospital and had over 20 surgeries due to spinal damage. And this is one of the rare cases of both victims surviving. And Fan, when she was talking to investigators, said she could not believe the brothers' lack of remorse. And that's typical, right, of our serial killers. Lack of remorse, lack of empathy. They don't care about anybody about themselves. They want to do what pleases them. They don't care if they kill. They don't care if they hurt. Doesn't matter to them. They're going to do what they want. And so this was absolutely a very, very unique case. But as you said, both Nathaniel and Anthony are all in at this point.
So we talk about the profiling perspective, right? Their MO, rape, murder. They're using different, gunshot, beating, baseball bats. Do you think they're a little organized, disorganized? They are targeting couples. What are you thinking at this
I think
point?
so my profile is they're very organized by this point. They have a victim pool. It is couples in a car or walking home. They're out searching for them. So these are not crimes of opportunity. They're not just driving up on them. They're out searching for victims. They know they're going to rob them. They know they may be carjacking them. But they also know that they're going to rape them and they're going to kill them. So going into it, I mean, you've got robbery, kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. They're both being very, very brutal at this point, kind of feeding off each other. We do see that dynamic. Matter of fact, usually we see it in groups or crowds or gangs. When you have like an inner city gang, one member starts beating somebody else joins in, and before you know it, 5, 6, 7, 8 are all beating the victim. So we see this kind of mentality happening. Body disposal, they really do not care about these people. They just dump them in a remote site or in a park or in a alleyway, but there's no expectation of trying to hide them. They're not burying them. They're not trying to get away with it like you're never going to find this. They don't care about it. They committed their crime. It's over. It's done. And they're moving on to the next one. So I think these are very organized, sadistic serial killers who are getting their jollies on attacking couples together, raping the women, kidnapping them, and murdering them, or at least thinking that they've killed them. On each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature one of our Casaro Winery brands. And today I'm enjoying one of our newest, our True Crime and Wine Cold Case. Very distinct bottle. We designed a murder board for you on the bottle. But this is a dry red wine. It's a blend of our Graciano and Tempranillo. Yes, two Spanish varietals. The Graciano contributes plum and blackberry notes, while the Tempranillo adds that spicy, peppery, and it's a great drinkable combination. So, of course, there's no better wine to enjoy when you're listening to the True Crime and Wine podcast than our True Crime and Wine Cold Case.
Okay, John. So we've been talking about couples that they abducted, robbed, murdered. Some of them survived, thankfully, able to offer testimony. And I was thinking on the last segment, John, when you mentioned how she was able to really talk about the lack of remorse and having to go through something like that and then relive it as a survivor, and just seeing the lack of humanity had to be just, it's kind of, it just sticks with you, right? That stuck with her. So we're going to move on to Connie Thompson, white female, 19 years old. The Cooks picked her up. She was hitchhiking near the University of Toledo campus. They drove her to a secluded area where they both rape her multiple times over several hours. Then they strangle her, beat her to death, and her body was dumped in a culvert along the rural road in Lucas County. Her remains are found just days later. She is partially clothed and showed significant signs of severe trauma. I mean, sexual assault for hours and then beating her. I can only imagine. But this murder was linked to the brothers via their confessions and ballistic evidence from a gun used in other crimes.
Yeah, so that's how they linked it eventually. But of course, when it happened, they had no idea.
Yeah.
And they didn't have any suspects at the time. But thankfully, they did preserve the evidence from this crime, unlike one of the earlier crimes. And later on, when the brothers were arrested and confessed, that's how they linked him to it. And they linked the gun, which had been used in other crimes. So we see this predatory behavior. They've got guns. They're trolling around. They're looking for victims. And poor Connie was just out hitchhiking, and they came along her and ended her life. So at this point, they've really ramped up. They're very organized. They know what they want to do. They know how they want to do it. It really reminds me again, and I mentioned it earlier, of Married Murderers. This is so unusual that you have more than one serial killer, and that they're picking on victims two at a time. And even in that case, one of their victims was a hitchhiker. So we see them out trolling for victims. And if the opportunity presents itself and they see a hitchhiker, they get in the vehicle with them. Now they've got another victim.
Well, and you know, we talked about Nathaniel not really having any sort of record or have committing many crimes, any crimes really, except some parking ticket or traffic tickets. But you would think maybe if he wasn't built for this kind of thing, John, his conscience would have kicked in a little bit, right? Or
Yep.
said, you know what, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. Like, it's not who I am. It's not who I want to be, and just leaves, right? Maybe never sees his brother again, but he stays and he
Yeah.
is involved in that.
Great point. You're exactly right. Okay, so we can see in the moment him not knowing what to do when they kidnap the first couple, right? Because Anthony's not raping the girl yet. The guy's fighting and struggling to get away. I could see Nathaniel panicking. Right? Panicking. Never been in this situation, doesn't know what to do, has a gun. Oh my God, what do I do? He shoots him and kills him. But then why doesn't he think, oh my God, look what I did, and I don't want to be a part of this? And even if Anthony's only the one that rapes the girl during that crime and leaves her for dead, he's witnessing his brother raping and stabbing the victim and beating her multiple times. Why doesn't he, after that's out, say, I'm done, I'm out? That's a great question. Or maybe he does, and Anthony goes, no, you're not out, you're all in. You committed the murder. But still, even if you did it, if it was kind of, and I don't want to say, even if it was spontaneous, right? You still do it knowing and intentionally. But even if it was spontaneous in the minute, where do you cross that bridge that robbery and kidnapping and rape are okay and
Mhm.
murder's okay? So you're right. At some point, Nathaniel must have been predisposed to it. He put himself in the situation. He didn't try to get out of the situation, and he's going to be dragged down. Yep.
Well, and they're taking a different, they're going to go after a 12-year-old next, which I think changes this a little bit, at least from my perspective. I don't think they really care about maybe the age, but they are going
No.
after a 12-year-old. And this is one of their most heinous crimes. This is a white female, Dawn Bax. So this is at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. She's walking home from a roller skating rink with her friends in Toledo. They forced her into the car at gunpoint, drove her to an abandoned farmhouse in Lucas County, and rapes this child. Bax was then beaten to death with a concrete block, suffering massive head trauma. Her body was left at the scene and discovered the next day. Does this take a different, is this a different level for them at this point?
Totally. Yeah,
Okay.
totally. So, I mean, approaching a vehicle and wanting to carjack them or rob them is one thing. Then you're taking them out and committing, sexual assault and murder. But, and then picking up a hitchhiker who willingly gets in your car, right? You
Right.
stop. Hey, we're going that way. We'll take you. Totally different. They are driving down the street and see this 12-year-old with her girlfriends, stop, get out, grab her, and abduct her at gunpoint, and then take her to an area where they rape her and beat her to death. You're right. This is a whole new level, and why I think it's seen as one of the most heinous crimes that they commit during this killing, crime spree here. But actually, just they did take it to a different level with this.
Yeah.
In broad daylight,
Yes.
kidnapping this little girl. Absolutely, absolutely brutal. Absolutely horrible crime. And they discover her the very next day.
So now they've gone after a 12-year-old. So this really brings our victimology to, white female 12 to 20s. Some of them are being stalked, some of them are being raped. They're all being, shot, stabbed, or bludgeoned. Anything else where you're picking up on the victimology?
Yeah, I mean, they certainly have a victim that they want. These are two, black males, younger black males, and they are certainly going after a very specific group, white females. I would say teens to 20s, but now we've dropped even below the teens. And they're targeting couples, but they're also targeting individuals. So their MO is changing a little bit, their victimology is changing, and they're getting more violent. In that they're not just in it for carjacking or robbery, they're in it for rape, they're in it to beat the victim and to kill the victim. So again, we're seeing very organized crimes with a little bit of impulse mixed in here. I think the impulse might have been the hitchhiker, and that was maybe more opportunistic. Certainly it was probably very impulsive to go after a 12-year-old in broad daylight
Yes.
in front of a group of friends. They are power and control motivated. The abductions, the rape, the torture, they exhibit their dominance on them. We really believe that Anthony hates whites. When the victims were white, I think he later on said that he suffered trauma in prison, and that's where that came from. Escalating brutality, like I said, and sexual violence. And Anthony is certainly the older, dominant, more prolific brother. But Nathaniel participates up until the killing of the 12-year-old. And we think this did have an impact on Nathaniel when they picked up that 12-year-old. We kept wondering, where is he going to draw the line? He murdered the one victim. He's been involved in rapes and murders, and he's still going to participate, but not to the level he did before. And we think that years later, he talked about how raping and killing the 12-year-old stayed with him. So there may be some little sliver of conscious or empathy that may be left in him.
Okay. Okay. I was wondering maybe why that had not kicked in yet. And now, John, I do wonder if it did kick in at some point and it was a situation where he tells his brother he no longer wants to be involved or he doesn't like the way he's feeling after this. And maybe Anthony, if you tell anyone or if you leave what we're doing, I'll kill you. I mean, we don't
Right.
really know, right?
Right.
So,
Anthony was obviously the dominant one, right?
yes, yes.
Long before Nathaniel did anything, Anthony had been in and out of prison for multiple felonies and committed multiple felonies. So
Yeah.
Anthony was the criminal, the hardened one, and certainly the dominant one in this case,
Yeah.
which is typical. Usually when we have co-conspirators, co-serial killers, there is a dominant one and a more submissive one. It is very rare to get two that are co-dominant.
So they have, like you mentioned, they've been going after couples, young people. They've been using, firearms, the vehicles, kidnapping, getting people to get back into their vehicles. Sexual assault and murder is the name of the game for these two. But they did have biological evidence, which we talk about all the time, the evolution of DNA and how it's solving all of these cases now. This was actually done back in 1998, John, of the testing of the evidence. So thankfully, people collect this. Hopefully, police do a really good job of keeping these records. But we know, gosh, John, I can't tell you how many in the last week I've seen just crimes being solved 30, 40, 50 years
Yep.
because of DNA, preservation.
And you can see how sloppy they were. I
Yeah.
mean, in leaving evidence,
That's right.
they were not concerned about the evidence. They were not concerned about the bodies being found. They were getting away with what they wanted, which was to rape and murder, and they were done. And they absolutely did not think past that. Some of us go, well, how could that be? A lot of these offenders do not think past their crime. So that is a common characteristic. As you know, I've worked with serial killers and mass shooters all over the nation.
Yep.
That is a very common characteristic with mass shooters, especially. They plan and plan and plan and plan up to the moment they pull the trigger, and they have absolutely no plan after that. So these killers are not focused on the evidence, or they don't care about leaving evidence. They're not thinking about it. They are focused on the robbery, rape, and murder. And because of that, it's going to come back to bite them, because the police are collecting evidence in all of these cases and can come back and use it on them later.
Yeah. So we have another couple they targeted in 1981, Scott Moulton, white female, 21 years old, and Denise Siotkowski, white female, 22 years old. The brothers found them. The lovers were parked in a car on Lovers Lane in Toledo. They approached the vehicle armed. They force their way in, abduct the couple, and drive them to a remote spot. They raped the female, both brothers, while the Moulton was beaten and shot. They were both ultimately killed, John. Moulton by a gunshot wound to the head, and Siatowski by a combination of shooting and bludgeoning. So the targeting, again, back on couples.
Yeah, and even though the 12-year-old is sticking in Nathaniel's head, he's still committing the crimes.
Yeah.
He's still there. He's still doing it. He's still participating in the rapes and the murder. So later on, he says, well, that really affected me, but it didn't affect him enough to make him stop, to make him tell Anthony no more, or to make him stop. So he is just as culpable in this as Anthony. And again, they're leaving a bunch of evidence behind, both blood evidence and the rounds that are being shot into the victims and the casings are being used to tie them back to the weapons, which have been used in multiple cases. So we're getting weapons evidence and we're getting DNA evidence that is eventually going to put them away. But although the little girl disturbed him, apparently, it wasn't enough for him to stop.
No, because they go on to another couple, Daryl Cole and Stacy Balanek. Similar to the previous attacks, you have 21-year-old Daryl and 21-year-old Stacy abducted from their vehicle while parked in a secluded area. The brothers drove them, again to a rural location.
They've got this down, right?
Yeah, they've got it. It's like we're just kind of repeating the previous one.
But they're getting away with it.
Yes.
See, that's the thing. They have not been caught yet. And what do we say about serial killers? They're not going to stop until they're caught or killed or incarcerated. Something has got to make them stop. And they have got their routine down. Yeah. The only times that they varied were the hitchhiker and then picking up the 12-year-old, and they might have said, that wasn't very good. Let's go back to our old MO. But you're exactly right. They're finding these lovers, these couples, togethers in their car. They find them in secluded areas, which, think about this, Brandy. Now, you're a good, sweet young girl. You probably never did this.
No, never.
But there are a lot of couples that get in cars, and where do they stop to make out? In a remote location.
Yes.
Are you thinking about somebody following you, watching you? Are you thinking about somebody pulling a gun on you, robbing you, raping you, beating you, and murdering you? And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that we've got to talk about things like this, but you have to talk to young people. You have to talk to people, go, there are bad people in this world. This young couple probably just wanted to find a nice, quiet place where they could talk or make out or whatever. Did they think this was going to happen? Or the couple before them, or the couple before them, or the couple before them? I don't know. What do we tell young couples? What do we tell young girls? How do we get this through that there are bad people out there?
And your guard goes down. You're not around people. You don't think anyone's watching you. That's why you're going to the secluded area. So you're not really aware of your surroundings, except it's dark and trees or wherever you are. And I think that it's one of those things where you just always have to be aware of your surroundings. I mean, you do. Unfortunately, looking over your shoulder is not the way we all want to live. But there are bad people out there. You can be approached in grocery stores. And look at what happened to this 12-year-old. She is abducted from a group of people and forced into a vehicle at gunpoint. During broad daylight. Things happen. But yeah, they're not, John, but are they connecting all of these at this point? You have these lovers lanes and these couples. So my thought is, if this is in the news, if people are talking about this, why are couples still going out and going to the rural areas knowing that?
Right.
So
yeah,
that was another thought
I don't think the coverage was like that with Son of Sam.
Okay.
Son of Sam was happening in New York City, and it was all over, not only New York news, because if it's New York news, it's national news, for lovers and couples in cars, right?
Right.
That what Son of Sam was doing. And so that was a huge story. I don't think these crimes have been connected yet. I don't think the evidence has been connected yet. I don't think we've got witnesses that are saying, hey, we were in the area, we saw this car, we saw these guys. And so none of that is being connected, but the body count is piling up.
Yes.
Yeah, and you're in Toledo, and you're in East Toledo, and you're in a suburb of Toledo, so maybe some of that interagency cooperation wasn't there. Yeah. Maybe the coroner's office wasn't connecting some of these bodies. But yeah, you would think by this time, we're already at double digits.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
That somebody would have been going, what is going on? And putting the word out. That's why we looked at victimology. Why do we study victimology? So we can determine the victim group, so we can get on the air and get in the media and say, white females, young white females, watch out. Stay in groups. Don't get isolated. Don't go to remote areas and park. Couples, stay away from the lovers' lanes,
Yeah.
right? Find
Yeah.
somewhere else to go. We try to put that information out there to warn victims. That's why we do victimology profiling, or one of the reasons that we do it. But it's just unfortunate. These poor couples are just trying to get a little quiet time, alone time.
Mhm.
Like you said, they let their guard down. And with this young couple, they had Cole was shot. She was beaten in the head and suffered fatal injuries, and they were dumped in the field. It wasn't long later they were discovered, but this is their pattern, preying on these young couples.
Well, you talked about, why you do victimology and also geographic profiling, right? They're in Toledo, and I guess that's why it's so hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that they aren't, even if they haven't identified who's done this and whether or not the same people are committing these crimes are happening. The bodies are being found. And so you do have this Toledo, Ohio area, which I would be curious how big Toledo was back in this time. And then you have them, stalking their victims. Sometimes they're taking them by gunpoint. They're, seeking them in remote areas. So I am a little surprised that they haven't really put any of these together, at least a warning, right? At least
Yeah,
getting a warning out there.
I think maybe the difference with, if I remember right, with a lot of Son of Sam's victims, he
Hmm.
shot him in the vehicle, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
These, they are sometimes uh, taking them out of the vehicle, committing the crimes, and dumping them at other locations. So maybe they're not
Mm.
putting all the,
I see.
we've got multiple crime scenes. We don't just have one crime scene, a couple on the street in New York City killed.
Yeah.
We have a crime scene where they disappear from, maybe where their vehicle is left behind. We have a crime scene where they're beaten and shot, and then we have a crime scene where they're dumped. So I gotta think that
Mm.
it's the totality or the combination of all of that that the cases aren't being, linked. I'm getting ready for the upcoming session of CrimeCon. Yes, it's upon us already. And I see that you are too, because I noticed a significant jump in orders of our true crime and wine merchandise, like our wine glasses, our tumblers, and our t-shirts. And I've seen that you're going to shoptruecrime.com and preparing for CrimeCon. Now, I was on there this week too. I ordered some stickers, some t-shirts, and both books that I brought last year, the popular Police Perspective book, and that's My Stories from the Street. And of course, our True Crime Profilers Notebook, where you can profile along with your favorite show, your favorite podcast. So I'll have both books. I'll have some t-shirts, some stickers at our booth at CrimeCon, but I can't bring everything from the store. So if you want to look at any other merchandise, just go to shoptruecrime.com. That's our Shopify store. You can get all of our logo items. But if you're in Vegas, if you're at CrimeCon, come by the booth, say hi, check out the merch. We'll take a picture and visit about true crime and wine.
We're going to talk about the next victims, Sabo and Sawiki. So this is another couple, but John, in this one, Anthony is committing the crime by himself against two people. So he is
Yep.
now seeking out a couple. He confronts them. They're parked in
Which,
a van. Go
yeah,
ahead.
which is unusual, Brandy.
Yes, it is.
Why?
Well,
Why?
because one person, in my thought, I'm not, I don't have your experience, but just as a normal layman, I would say it's very difficult to control two people if you're one person. That would be my first thought. And the fact that, is this a power trip for him to be able, is this something new that he's going to get a couple by himself? He doesn't need his brother. I don't know.
Exactly. No, I think it's two scenarios. You just mentioned one. Is it a power and control thing that I'm going to do this on my own and I can go after a couple and I can kill them and I'm the big, dominant, strong one? Or is Nathaniel getting cold feet? Is he
Mm.
starting to say, I don't want to do this anymore? or I don't want to be involved. Two very, very interesting scenarios. So
Interesting.
we don't know exactly which one. But you're right. You're right. Anthony goes, and he's only a couple of blocks away from the police station. He confronts these couple in a car, just like they've been doing as a team. He tries to rape Sawicki, right?
Yep.
But she escapes and runs to call police. And although he was only 2 blocks away from the Ottawa Hills police station, the call had to go through the main Toledo dispatcher, be redispatched to the Ottawa Hills Police Department, and then have them respond to the scene. Now, you go, wait, that's crazy. That's not crazy. Many small communities, many small cities contract. They don't have their own dispatch center. They can't afford it. They contract with the nearest largest city so that all 911 calls get routed to a central dispatch center. Often we see this in rural counties too. If you're anywhere in the county, every call goes into a centralized dispatch center and then goes out to the sheriff's office or the small police department. So that's not unusual. And that's exactly what happened in this case. Well, since the police still weren't there, what does Sawicki do? She gets on the phone and calls her dad.
Okay.
And her dad, who is a well-known businessman and real estate developer, goes to help.
Oh, God.
The dad actually gets there before the cops. And Anthony fatally shoots him in the throat. So he's going to defend his daughter and her boyfriend and ends up dead. A 43-year-old real estate developer, popular businessman, doing nothing but going to try to save his daughter. He gets there for the police and ends up dead.
Okay, John. So where is she? How is she making this 911 call? Where is she?
Yeah, I only assume that she had a phone with her or got to a phone. There was a struggle when he was trying to rape her. I think the boyfriend was trying to fend him off. The boyfriend and Anthony were struggling. She was able to get out of the car and run in and get to a phone.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
And then the dad arrives where Anthony is and shoot, that's just terrible.
Well, so this is really, really a botched crime, right?
Yeah.
Because now he's got 2 living witnesses. So now they have, and that's why we said earlier, we haven't had witnesses up to this point. Now, we did have the girls of the 12-year-old, the girlfriends, but how much description do they have? How much vehicle description they have? They're young girls who were kind of traumatized. Who knows exactly what they saw? But here you've got 2 people that were victims of a crime, and they see the whole thing. They see Anthony. They can describe him. His fingerprints are left at the crime scene. Are they in the system? Well, of course they are. He's a multiple-time convicted felon. That's all they have to do is run his fingerprints. They know exactly who he is. So between people on the street, between the victims of the crime and the fingerprint, they had all the information they need. They went and picked him up and arrested him on October 14th, 1981. Now, at that time, they didn't have any other evidence to connect him with the murders, but they had what they needed to convict him of Peter Sawicki's murder, and he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Now, after Anthony's conviction, because again, they didn't have evidence of these other crimes yet, after Anthony's conviction, Nathaniel doesn't keep doing it.
Yeah, he stops.
He stops his criminal lifestyle, and the only time he's ever arrested after that is for something really minor. So remember we threw up that scenario? Was it Anthony with a power trip or Nathaniel backing out? Now that Anthony's in prison, Nathaniel can back out.
Yeah.
He's free of that relationship.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And he does. So isn't that just a wild paradigm that he was a good kid before it?
Hmm.
That he went from good kid to rape, robbery, and murder? And then as soon as his brother doesn't have control of him anymore,
Hmm.
he goes back to a decent or non-criminal lifestyle.
Yeah, and that's what kind of what we've talked about in the beginning was um trying to see what the dynamic in his mind was when it was dealing with his brother. And now we can kind of see maybe it was just either a threat, the power and control that he had over Nathaniel, or the fact that he just wanted some sort of connection to his brother, and maybe this was
Attachment. Yep.
the attachment they got. So what do we know about the DNA testing in 1998?
Well, so now we've got a lot of cold case detectives in 98 working on these various crimes, and they start testing DNA. DNA's really coming around in the late 1990s. DNA was being used. It was being certified by the courts as reliable. We were starting to see the boom in DNA testing, which has continued on to this day as it's gotten better and better and better.
Mhm.
Courts now have ruled, it was the late 1990s when the courts say, yeah, you can use DNA and it can be used to tie people to previous crimes and to get convictions. So they started testing the DNA and found the DNA on February 13th of 98. Nathaniel was arrested and charged with the murder of Thomas Gordon and the attempted murder of his girlfriend. So
Right.
now we see them. Anthony's in prison. He's doing life, and the DNA is starting to pop up on both of them. And what happens is they get DNA from the Gordon Pogorski scene. They link it to both brothers, right?
Hmm.
Anthony's already in prison doing life. Now they're going to go after Nathaniel. They go back to the brothers and say, we've got you. Matter of fact, we've
Yeah.
got you on a number of cases, and we want you to plead out to them to clear these cold cases. Now, for Anthony, it didn't matter. He's never going to get out. So he confesses to 9 of the murders.
Okay.
Like, I did it. I
Yeah.
confess. What are you going to do to me? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not going to kill me, and I'm never getting out. Nathaniel confesses to 3 of the murders and also admits to numerous rapes and abductions. And in an interview later on, Anthony showed just how cruel and violent and vile he was because he showed no remorse, that
Mhm.
he just was very clinical, like we see these serial killers in committing these crimes. Nathaniel, a little bit different. He said he was remorseful about the 12-year-old and the
Yeah.
murder, but still, you got to remember, he committed 2 other murders after that. So in total, we ended up with 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 that we are positive of that have been connected through confessions,
Hmm.
DNA, fingerprints, firearms, bullets, casings. So we've got both physical evidence and confessions and the best DNA that is linking. I think it's really strange that we've got a survivors list and a victims list here.
Yes. And
Just
and multiple survivors, right? Like
yeah,
usually we
yeah.
might have one that made it out, but these are multiple survivors.
Yeah, so we had 9 victims that were murdered, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 of them that survived. Remember how they thought they
Crazy.
beat the one to death? They
Yes.
thought they stabbed one to death. They thought they bludgeoned one to death. Savicki got out right in the very beginning. Sabo got out, because he killed Savicki's dad. But we have a survivor list of 5 different people and a victims list of 9. Anthony ended up with multiple life sentences, and Nathaniel was sentenced to 75 years in their plea agreement. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't think that Anthony is ever going to get out. He was denied parole multiple times and will not come up again for a long time. Nathaniel, however, who was sentenced to 15 to 75 years, was released in 2018 under a plea deal and lives under supervision and other aspects of his agreement. So obviously the prosecutors thought that Anthony was the dominant person here, that Anthony was really driving the ship, driving the crimes, had no remorse, no empathy, that Nathaniel, for whatever reason, wanted to be a part of his brother's life and the criminal acts. He committed it. He's guilty of them, and he was sentenced also. But this is just a very, very unusual case of two brothers, sibling serial killers. As we put a cork in this edition of the True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind our listeners you can follow us on all of our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine, that we post the episodes that when they're coming out and the schedule. We also let you know what's going on with our live events and everything else. As for the wines, you can always order them at CasaroWines.com, CASSARO wines.com, so that you can drink wine and profile the killers along with Brandy and myself. So that wraps up our business for today, and I want to thank Brandy Diamond for joining me on this journey, and our producer, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center, for making the show possible. And I invite you to join us for the next episode, where we examine a nurse who decided that she could play God with little children. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us on True Crime and Wine. Salute.